So over to you, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Nina, and thank you all for coming and having me. I want to make a few slides to begin with, just to set the scene, and then I think Nina and I will have a conversation. But I'm sure that any questions from you would be welcome as you go along, if you can raise your hand and things. I'm trying some natty technology now. It's not a normal slideshow, but if you can see my image, perhaps if you pin me, you'll get it full size on your Zoom screen. And then I start. So just to set the scene, a few things. This is the sort of things I want to cover. So what do I think researchers might like to know, might need to know from our experience? And please correct me if there are other things that come to your mind that you'd like to discuss. So what does that mean? And I understand the focus of your foundation, your center, is a lot about digital therapeutics, DTX. I'm using that as a key point today, but it doesn't have to be that we only talk about that.
Yeah, we have the DTX focus, as I mentioned to you, Mike. We also have researchers, though, in immunology, in AI, in hardware, software, but we could definitely lead with digital therapeutics, and especially software as a medical device. So
terrific. Yeah. And then, so now what? The takeaways. So if we go on that basis, then what I would like to say is, first of all, just to introduce our company, we are a consulting company that's been around for a few years. That, as Nina said, we help startups. The point of this is to say, one of the key things is starting up a company doing this work is a multidisciplinary thing. We see clinicians, IP people, health economics people, go-to-market strategy people. So we start with the takeaways already, that whatever we talk about quality and regulatory today needs to be taken in the context of a whole strategy. That's okay. And what I would also like to say, to start to use some of the terminology we use, we talk about minimum viable product, and we talk about it in a holistic way, not just the software engineering term. And this is why we say you have a minimum viable product. If you can get someone to invest in it, and if you can get it past regulatory approval, then it's, if you like, it's a viable software as a medical device or any medical device product. But is it marketable? So what's the next step? A minimum marketable product. So one of the takeaways I want to give is, often when I talk to founders or inventors, they have this great idea of what is their product, but they don't know why so much. Why would it be invested in to allow it to be developed? And why would actually a healthcare system or some other customer actually buy it? Hence the reason we set up this consultancy with our 5 verticals, our 5 dimensions, being not only quality and regulatory, but also clinical, strategy, go-to-market strategy, intellectual property, and health economics. So let's go on to today. So I put here 2 things. On the right, Nina recently made a post, which I thought was useful to bring up. Maybe you've all seen that on LinkedIn. But to go with that, what I want to do is give the definition with my underlining. The reason I underline particular bits is an important part of what we do is the evidence space. You're researchers, you're trying to generate evidence. That's great. What we need to understand is, have you got an evidence-based therapeutic intervention, if you're talking about digital therapeutics, and driven by software because it's digital, and the bit that my head is in the way of, so I'll move. Have you got a proven clinical benefit? Can you prove a clinical benefit in what you're doing? So one of the other takeaways is regulators will normally say, it's not their business about whether you can sell the product or not. They'll say, can you tell us what the state of the art is in the field you're in? Are you trying to replace state of the art? Are you trying to augment it? So what do you have to be clinically superior, or at least non-inferior to? And what else can you bring to the party? Is that making sense, Nina? we should talk about sometimes where one of the things we do is think about the boundary. Have you got, as in the left column, a regulated medical device, a DTX, or have you got a wellness device? Let me give you an example. Who has the Apple Watch or a Samsung equivalent? Hands up. Who goes to the gym and uses it to see the heart rate and see the rings filling up with the exercise? Right. So that is not a medical device until you add the arrhythmia detection function, the one that tells you you've got atrial fibrillation or something. Go and see your doctor. That particular piece of software in itself is a medical device. So general wellness or device. And already there is one question, Tiago, please.
I'm sorry, this was the automatic Zoom thing of having the hand raised.
Oh. Yep, that's the Zoom AI one. Okay. So
Can I stop you there with the difference between the two? So what, I guess from my personal experience, because I had a wellness product and I intended to get a medical device in vitro diagnostic certification. If you have two products like this, is it very important to specify them very separately, or can you kind of convert your wellness product into your diagnostic product? And in your experience, would it be wise just to choose one instead of doing both? Because there's like a temptation to say, oh, let's start generating revenue in wellness. Let's sell our Apple Watch, and then let's load on those diagnostic features on top. I mean, they did it successfully, but not everyone's Apple.
No, but it's a great example, and it's what we often say when we do product strategy early on with founders, with startups, is exactly that. We generally call it iteration 0 of a product, because we're concerned with medical device mostly, but we say non-device product is iteration 0. Now consider why Apple did it. So you're using the app to record lots of heart rate signatures, yeah? Or they're recording them. You're using it to how am I doing in the gym? Apple is using it to gather a lot of data. These are what heart rate signatures look like with our technology in the real world, with real world movement and all. And then they're creating a big training data set, which is presumably there's something going on in the background trying to work out if there's some AF in it or not, or they're just creating a non-AF data. It doesn't really matter. One of the things you can do is, yeah, definitely start going to market with a wellness product, but have in your mind and your requirements that you implement that product, and what data do you need to gather to give a medical claim later. So what really is the motivation? You know, Google, what's the not a medical device, but Google, what's the motivation for them giving away search? They want to know what people are interested in.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense when you have something that is built, like when you're gathering that sort of data set. I think I think in my case I had an idea like going like this as well, but because I basically had an at-home diet, I kind of had a diagnostic. So I was in a very gray space. I would say the difference between these two was very narrow for mine, because I had like the urine testing strip, which actually is there is like a medical version of it on the market. So this can be a hard area to operate in.
It all goes into what we call intended use. Is there a medical purpose? There's a definition of a medical device. So we go back to the definition of a DTX, evidence-based therapeutic. So if you say you are providing a therapy, if you're alleviating a disease, a condition, its obvious case is mental health apps. If you're applying it at therapy, CBT, ACT, one of the known therapies, or a novel one, to help people feel less depressed, depression is a medical condition, help people feel less anxious, anxiety is a medical condition, you're alleviating a disease, you have a medical device. If you're just talking generally about, we're going to give you some motivational tips to lift your mood, not. So this is why it's perhaps important to figure out from the start, and a lot of what we do in the early product strategy is what are you and what are the iterations and what do you need to get from one iteration to the other. So I don't know if that resonates with the research that any of you all are doing.
Yes, I maybe I can talk on that because that was a question that I wanted to do. If it was related with the intended use, that would make the shift between a wellness app and a medical device. Because, for instance, we are not all of us working on digital therapeutics, but also diagnostic and ways to assist surgeons to do surgeries hopefully better and more successfully. And that was one of the cases that we wanted to get your pick your brain on, was like you can always do like pre-planning, start in a way like place your medical device as a pre-planning tool, which most likely already is a medical device, right? So in this domain of guiding surgeries and even using medical images to guide surgeries, it will always be a medical device, right? We can never go to a wellness app.
So it's a medical device because you are providing something that goes into intervention for an individual patient by planning their surgery. So I spent 3 years prior to this consulting life as chief technical officer of a company that used virtual reality, immersive haptic feedback systems for training in microsurgery. That technology was not a medical device because it was generally for training the surgeon in their skill of using the surgical instruments. It wasn't for getting that surgeon to be able to do the operation on one individual patient with that patient's particular characteristics. If it was, then it would be a medical device. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so to move on, but please do keep asking questions like this. A thing that's perhaps not in the front of your mind when you're doing the early research, but will come later if you want to realize your product, and if you then want to go from the research and you want to get into the commercialization of your idea, is you need several things. You need, at the left, a clinical development life cycle, which I want to talk about a little. So you've got to think how you're generating the evidence. If we go back and remember the definition, evidence-based and proven clinical benefit, you need some claims, you need a hypothesis, and you need to prove the hypothesis. That's our clinical development life cycle. You also need a software development life cycle. So again, digital world, how are you developing the software to be safe, effective, and cyber secure? What requirements are you making? What are you going to do to implement it? What are you going to do to test it to make sure that it's safe, effective, and cyber secure? How are you going to release it? How are you going to keep patches in it? Again, security maybe more than safety. How are you going to monitor its effectiveness on the market and figure out if there are problems? Again, not your problems so much in early research, but this will come when you're becoming a product really to use on human beings. Diego, is that the waving again, or is this a question this time?
It's a question. It's about the software development lifecycle. So assuming that you've developed a medical device, you perform the necessary clinical trials to get certification. You got certification for a certain version of your medical device. Now it's there on the market, and you continue iterating on it. So it's not clear what constitutes like an upgrade that requires novel clinical trials. How much can the medical device change to still maintain its certification for use, even though, this is already, version 2, version 3, maybe you replace some components, maybe you just change something on the software. Like, do you still, every time you make a change, do you need to, you probably don't need to do another clinical trial. So like, could you talk a bit more about that process?
Absolutely. It's a great question and really important, and trips many companies up if they don't go through a process of learning like we are having. So say you have version 1.0.0, and I use the semantic version numbering specifically for a good reason. So your version 1.0.0 is the first thing you get certified, first thing you ever CE mark. Now you need change control. You need to consider every change you make. Now, whether it's a small spelling error you found on a page, whether it's, okay, someone doesn't like the color of the background, you change it a bit, or you want to do some aesthetic refresh, whether it's a security patch, because you found one of the components you use has some vulnerability where you could leak data, or anything. The temptation with software in perhaps the enterprise world and the idea of agile software, when agile methodology isn't used correctly, is that you change and quickly release something new. Medical devices, that doesn't work. The first thing you need to consider is, if you're going to release something, what is the change you're going to release away from the version 1.0.0? Yeah. And every time you want to create a release, so you can iterate as much as you want internally, but when you want to release it for human, proper clinical use, we say it like this. We first of all develop requirements in tiers. We say this tier 2, tier 0, the top tier of requirements. What's the intended use? The story you're trying to tell with the software. Tier 1, what's the product requirements? What's in your, if I can say it, what's in your problem space? What problem are you trying to solve? And tier 2 is, how do you solve it? What's the solution? Yeah. If I can explain something like, if you have to instruct a user, well, if a user needs to log in, you need to be a registered user. So really abstract example from the medical functionality, but if you have to log into a system, you say people have to authenticate. That's a tier 1 requirement. You can't use the system anonymously. So the tier 2 requirement is, how do you authenticate? Do you have a biometric login? Do you use username and password? Do you use multi-factor? And another tier 2 requirement is, and how do you write in the instructions for the product how you log in? See what I mean? So then you think of every change you want to make. Is it a tier 2 change? Is it a tier 1 change? Is it a tier 0 change? So say when there's the transition from the fingerprint ID to the Face ID. So it's still a biometric login, but a different form of biometric login. So maybe that's a tier 2 change. The how you do it has changed. You re-verify. We say you re-verify. You have to test that that technical feature now works, but the intent of it is the same. If you make a really big change, you say, okay, the whole thing about people don't have to log in to somehow you don't have to log in. That's not a good example. That's a tier 1 change. You have to revalidate. You have to see if your real world users can cope with that change. But now, if you then say the tier 0 change is, say your intended patient population is adults. Adults have particular characteristics of their bodies in some, what you're doing, maybe pediatrics, children with their growing bodies have different considerations for you. And now you want the product to work on pediatric, on children as well as adults. That's a tier 0 change, because you're changing part of the intended use of your product. That's when you have to recertify it. So that's why it's really important to think about, every time you want to release a change as part of your change management, call it a change request. What is the tier of change? Do you have to re-verify? Do you have to revalidate? Or do you have to recertify? And then in business terms, you have to think, and is it worth it? Do we really want to do that? Does that help?
Yeah, greatly. Thank you.
And this is why we have this concept of fundamental planning you do, and then cycles of development, deployment, development, deployment. So fundamentals, you can see maybe it's a little small, but see, it's basically about the planning overall of the whole strategy of your product. And then the development and deployment cycle is then you plan that release. What is the change you want to make in that release? Make it, test it, deploy it, make sure it's still okay. And then around that, there's maintenance as well. How do you make sure when a product's on the market, it's still performing correctly? How do you make sure your quality management system for running your company that's deploying that product is still running correctly? So I don't want to dwell on that, but I want to say there are ways to think about phases of work. So it's great doing the research, but now when it gets nitty-gritty, really realizing a product, there's a lot to be thought of. And this is why we go into this idea now of one of the key things we like to do at the start as well is think of what is your strategy. Regulatory strategy to begin with, from my point of view, but intellectual property strategy. What is the value you're generating? What is it that makes your idea valuable? Is it that it'll save an insurance system money? Is it that by using it, you're actually generating a load of data that's going to be valuable for another purpose? Is it that you've had a great idea that's protectable by patent? And then you can license that idea. And the other key thing of the strategy is, again, not just regulatory, how do you get where you to certify a product, but we call, as it says at the bottom, health economics and outcomes research strategy. That's the really important bit about the why would someone buy it. So what is the point? Is it going to save money for social medicine system? Is it going to cause some entity like a private entity to make more money? So how are you going to persuade someone to buy it? That making sense? Any question, any thought?
I can jump in with a question.
Please.
How early in the research and development phase do you need to start thinking about the strategy? I know a lot of times it's as early as possible, but sometimes it doesn't feel right when it's so early. What's the earliest team you've worked with, and what was the biggest problem you saw when somebody came to you too late?
One anecdote is when we're working on its publicly funded projects, I can sort of say something about it, is for colorectal cancer, the normal test in the UK is a fit test, feces. You take a sample of your stools, you poo at home and send the sample. For some people, that's socially not very acceptable, or they just don't like to do it. So the potential replacement for that is a blood test, because we can find a biomarker in blood that does the same. So that's what our client wants to do. The problem was, when we took that to a body of the National Health Service, so a medicine system, and said, this is what we want to do, various ones said, well, this is not the pathway we use. We can't really do that. Perhaps that's a pathway locally to the hospital and university where the idea came from, but in other parts of the country, it doesn't quite fit in the clinical pathway, or there's some conservatism. They don't think things can change so much, or maybe that's only a screening thing, because actually the clinicians don't really believe yet that without follow-up test they can do what they want to do. So that changed quite a lot the intended use of the product. So it's never too early. It's the what and the why as early as possible. You don't want to go down the road of spending many months or years doing a what, but there is no why. So this research, I think, is really important about what the application. Why would anyone adopt the technology?
So you're also saying not even just talking with you in terms of regulatory, it's like finding that customer talking to the potential, basically talking to the potential buyer as early as possible and making sure there's no, like, they're just saying, there's no way that we can put this in our clinical path.
Yeah, we've had other mental health companies come to us, so mental health digital therapeutic. I don't know how much you know about this subject, but you can say about depression, there's mild, moderate, or severe depression. There's a scale for measuring. Now, it's great. They're saying, well, we think our product is good for people with severe depression. Going, fantastic. If you can prove the clinical evidence, again, back to that evidence I said on a previous slide. However, you are not going to sell it to the National Health Service in the UK. Maybe it's the same thing in Portugal, because they say that only computer-based, these therapy tools are only allowed on people with mild and moderate symptoms. So what's the point of talking about severe? And what's the point of generating all the evidence, spending extra money? Because it's not allowed yet. Or if you really want to do that to differentiate yourself, actually the stage you're at is shifting the bar with the buyers. To actually start showing them that you can do something with severe, because at the moment the rules say they can't buy it. So actually what you need to be doing is showing how the rules can be changed. Not showing that you've got a product that works, but it doesn't fit the rules. See what I mean? So that's really important to understand with this strategy. So what is your goal? And that's what we say. So reality, where are you and where is the scientific community? Options and obstacles. So what could you do and what could be in the way that you need to overcome? And then you get to the way forward. What are the steps you need to take? So if that's another takeaway, this idea of the grow idea of strategy, that would be great for me.
I also had a question around clinical benefit. So I know you said this in terms of digital therapeutics. Does the proven clinical benefit apply to any other types of medical devices? And then what is the definition of a clinical benefit? Is it 5% better, 20%? Is there a guideline around that?
Not really. You want to be superior to something. So statistically, if say you're trying to say you've got an accuracy for a test, however you measure accuracy, sensitivity, specificity, so is it specificity, PPV, positive predictive value, any, it doesn't really matter. So statistically, you apply the bell curve to it. How do you statistically say it's not the state of the art in medicine in where you want to sell it is 89%. Now you've got 90%, just about. It's how can you be statistically better? Where do you need to be so the bell curve tails off at 89? So that's one side of it if you want to measure accuracy. There's another side, there's a whole other side of digital things, something like image enhancement on an X-ray or CT or something. So the clinician can focus on some part, you clean up the image so they can see something on an ultrasound, because I can never understand how sonographers read ultrasounds. So you're cleaning up an image, but there isn't really a clinical measure. So it is possible to have a product where you don't have a clinical benefit that you can measure, but you've got to justify in qualitative terms, not quantitative terms, why that product should be on the market. What is it that you're giving now the clinician and the patient that's not measurable, but what you still got to have something. Got to be able to say something. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, that helps, and also makes me think of another example. I think in terms of imaging, there's quite a few softwares that are allowing, radiologists to be able to better categorize their medical images, and maybe are acting as like a decision support tool, but they're not making a diagnosis in the software, but they are helping a radiologist find images like a scan that they've done that is confusing or is raising questions. since I find that is another very gray space between a medical device and a non-medical device, is like, what would be a decision support tool? How do you, if you're guiding somebody to make a diagnosis, are you still a medical device?
So that's interesting. So we need to turn to the USA because the rules are very, there's a different way of looking at it, let's say, in Europe, in the EU, and the UK. The US, there's two pieces of terminology. You can have the concept of a clinical decision support system, which is a bit deregulated, but there's some very specific rules about what it can be. But the US strangely deregulated some of those. But there are some rules about what it does. The other thing that the US gives is a set of buckets to put a technology into, which is very useful everywhere. So you can have computer-aided triage, computer-aided detection, computer-aided diagnosis, CAD-T, CAD-E, CAD-X. Why those buckets are important is this. Triage, are you just saying, and this is all you're allowed to say with this CAD-T tool, this patient must be looked at by a clinician more urgently than this other patient. So promote them on a work list. Don't say why, saying, okay, well, you know what, say it's looking for a particular, some feature, but you can't expose the feature. All you can say is this patient needs to be looked at more urgently, but all patients will still be looked at. Next level up is CAD-E, computer-aided detection. You say, there's an area on this image that's suspicious. Someone still needs to look at it. A clinician still needs to use their judgment, but there's an area, you highlight an area that's suspicious. Now, why that is important to draw the line is because a clinician with automation bias will inherently say, yeah, that's a problem if you're not careful, yeah? Or that's not a problem, yeah. So all you're doing is drawing their attention to an area. The ultimate is CAD-X, computer-aided diagnosis, where you're actually saying, we think this is what's wrong with this patient. And again, you can see the automation bias problem. That's got to be really accurate because the clinician will go, yeah, computer says this is the problem, so this is the problem. But as we all know, there's no such thing as 100% accuracy. So what could happen if you do a CAD-X and you believe it too much? And if a clinician doesn't know the limit of accuracy? Yeah, does that help? So
Yeah,
these
that
are
helps a
all
lot.
considerations, and you're researching, you're trying to prove some hypotheses about your new technology, what it could be working for. It's worth, I think, early on considering how far could that technology go? CAD-T, CAD-E, CAD-X, and that model of image or signal analysis.
But all these three cases are medical devices, right?
They're all medical devices.
That was my follow-up. Thanks.
Yeah.
They might be of different classes, but probably they are all class 2, right?
They will be in the EU now. They'll be class 2 or class 3. Class 2A, class 2B, or class 3, depending on the next slide. Thank you for that pointer. You look, we have a 3x3 matrix, or 2 dimensions to look at it. Significance of the information. Are you informing clinical management? Are you driving clinical management? So typically driving clinical management means you've got something time critical information from a system. You need to know, say your IVD again, you're measuring, do you need to give someone an antibiotic? Is there some bacterial infection or something? You need to know very quickly. That might be driving. Or are you the third level, treating or diagnosing? That's one dimension. The other dimension there are some formal definitions. Is the condition you're looking at non-serious? Is it serious? Is it critical? So that's how we create which class it is. Because there's a matrix that says, depending on, there's 3x3, so there are nine different things it could be. So depending which of those 9 is the classification. Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit more the difference between informing and driving?
You can think of it as two things. Driving is when there's something time sensitive, or if you made a mistake with it, it's the condition of the patient is irreversible. There's a little bit of an art to justifying these. But basically, informing means it's not so time sensitive, and if you get it wrong, you can reverse the problem that the patient is having. You can still reverse the problem. Driving means it's either time sensitive and or if you make a mistake, you can't reverse the problem that the patient's having.
Okay, thank you.
So that's how we classify, and that's again because as you go up the classes from 2A to 2B to 3, and I'm saying there's no class 1 in the digital therapeutics. It starts at 2A in the current system in the EU. You incur more cost and more time. So the question is, do you want to be a higher class, or have you got a product that's actually clinically useful, it's useful to patients, it can be commercially successful at a lower class? That's all part of the strategic discussion. And some of that is going back to this options and obstacles. How much evidence can you generate to demonstrate which class it should be? Yeah. So I'm taking all the time up with this, but hopefully it's proving useful. So we talk about quality management systems. This is about how to run your company. So this is more case of when you come out of your research setting into now perhaps spinning out a company to realize a technology, you need particular procedures about how to run the company, how to run your development, how to deal with your suppliers, how to deal with your customers, how to deal with the regulatory authorities. Any thoughts, questions on that?
Can you outsource your QMS, or it has to be run, maintained, updated internally?
So QMS is all about the culture of your company. It's all about starting with the CEO and working downwards. Do they know what it means to have quality? Quality means fitness for purpose. In a medical device, do they know what it takes if the CEO, the CTO, every developer, staff clinicians, do they know what effect their work will have on product quality? Do they know what will happen if they make a mistake in terms of the safety, effectiveness, and cybersecurity of the product? And I put it this way to my clients: when now you become audited, so you have your certification audit, and you have a surveillance every 3 years, you get recertified. It's you, Mr. CEO, Mrs. CEO, and your staff who are being interviewed by the auditor, not me. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Regarding QMS and also the software life cycle, like imagine a use case where there was a proof of concept that was built with several building blocks. Again, as Nina mentioned, probably as soon as possible, but how soon should QMS and also a life cycle be implemented once you want to move from this proof of concept and starting to build something more meaningful towards a medical device?
Well, we call that part design control, and we say it starts as soon as possible. Now, are you familiar with the concept of technology readiness level, TRL?
Yes.
Do you know the Horizon 2020 version of it?
Think so.
Anyway, so it doesn't really. We tend to suggest that TRL 1, 2, and 3. You're just proving you're principally doing the initial research. No, when it's 3 or 4, then you start.
Okay.
And then how we put our model is that 8 is the MVP that you get certified. 9 is when you're really on the market and people are really using it. So the MMP, minimum marketable product.
Okay.
So 3 or 4 is about the right time.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And again, a little bit more on QMS. Are there standards for QMS that you can look up so you can start conducting the internal affairs within your company or even your research group according to a QMS that exists, or like some references? And then where could you find them?
There is a key international standard that everyone but the USA works to. But the USA is actually changing their regulations, and sometime in the future they're adopting the international standard. It's called ISO 13485, 13485. It's the standard of how to do quality management to meet regulatory requirements. Having said that, you guys are in the EU. There are specific QMS requirements on top of that, imposed by the European Union Medical Device Regulation and the in vitro diagnostic medical device regulation. There are a few things that 13485 doesn't say you ought to have to do. There are other standards go with it. 14971 is the second most important. It's the risk management standard. It's how to figure out patient safety, user safety, and cybersecurity risk, and how to mitigate it. And there are other standards, but those are the key ones. So what we would say is a shameless plug for the sort of work we do is we have a reference model QMS, because we mostly deal with software as medical device small companies. It's made for that sort of company. It's that you really need the QMS to be customized to work for you and your colleagues in your company realizing the technology. It's not something you can just buy off the shelf. You can buy templates, you can download free ones from places on the web, but you've really got to understand how to use them. Does that help, Nina?
Yeah, that helps. So then when you're going through the certification process, you would certify your QMS for 13485.
Yeah.
And for 14971 if it applies. And then
Yeah.
you would get your MDRR 2A or whatever. So your third kind of the actual medical device certification.
So you certify the QMS and you also certify each device, the group of devices. So you certify the QMS and you certify the product. So the QMS certification says your company is capable of those steps you said before, developing, deploying, and maintaining a product. And the certification of the product says you've actually done it for that product.
And can you use your QMS to then develop multiple products? Or do you have to have a QMS specific for each one?
The QMS is all about how you run the company.
Okay.
Okay. And the very last one I just talk about then, and as part of your question about outsourcing, part of the thing you need to do is have someone who knows specifically what the regulation are, because that's part of the EU regulation. Again, that doesn't send 13485. You need someone with specific skills and experience and training, either within the company or a small company, outsource it to actually make sure this all happens. So that's basically what I wanted to say. And hopefully that helps. It's taken, well, 50 minutes so far to say it. But what
We
else?
we interrupted you though.
It's
So
fine. That's what it's for.
I guess on the last one for person responsible. So is this a service then you provide at Hardian?
Yeah.
That okay. So that you have a yearly fee to be the person responsible.
Yeah, but that comes much later after you've developed your product, your QMS. You then need to show you've got this.
Okay.
And it's a temporary gig because actually the experience thing is you need 4 years experience in the industry. So how we normally do it is mentor someone in your company, and at 4 years, then they have enough experience to do it themselves.
Oh wow. And is this just for the EU MDR? Does this also apply for the US?
No, the US doesn't have this requirement. This is a specific EU thing. Not even the UK has this post-Brexit. It's a specific EU thing.
Got it.
So I don't know what else if
Yeah, we can open it up to questions from anyone. Feel free to unmute yourself and just jump in.
maybe in the middle. So yeah, stunned silence.
Well, regarding digital therapeutics and software as a medical device, so you might undergo the QMS certification, but there are other certifications for software, right? Do you need to really certify yourself or your software for those, or you can demonstrate that you are complying with this without doing the certification? How does this work?
If it's a digital therapeutic in the EU, you need a CE mark. If it's a digital therapeutic in the US, you need an FDA clearance. So,
and to get that
mark,
CE mark, are you always required, for instance, to get like the medical software lifecycle processes, like the 62304, or
yes.
okay?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
the funny term called presumption of conformity says if you follow these standards and you show you follow these standards, then the notified body, the people who review and audit you, should know that you're doing things properly. If you don't follow the standard, if you don't write your documentation around those standards, they'll just say to you, why?
Okay. I have more questions, but I wanted to to give time to others.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so like we have been hearing a lot about this EU AI Act. Does it change something towards the current medical device regulation, or is the current medical device regulation already like on top of all these things that the UI Act is supposedly trying to do?
It's very similar to the EU AI Act. So it's one. There are 4 tiers of AI in the EU. There's the one that's minimal, and then a bit of AI, then the third one, the fourth one is banned, things you're not allowed to do. The regulation comes with the third one, medical devices. It's the highest one before banned. And don't forget, incidentally, there's already some regulation, the GDPR, which talks about automated processing and what the subject needs to know. So how much automation are you applying to the medical, the treatment, the pathway of a particular subject in the EU?
Okay. I have another one. So
You're not being very shy, so go for it.
So I've heard that like now a lot of the notifying bodies are swamped with recertifications for this new regulation. So medical devices that were already certified need to apply for this MDR, correct me if I'm wrong. But then this would put the new applications into old, or that is what I perceived. How long is it taking for, or how fast for a new medical device are you getting an answer from the notifying bodies, assuming that you are dealing with clients that are applying for new certifications?
It's easily 18 months to 2 years
to get an answer from the first
to get certified. So this is how it works. You have to hire a notified body. They're a commercial company. You have to make a contract with them. Now, let me tell you how the EU changed the rules this year to try and address this problem. What they've said is to put the onus now on the notified bodies to fix the problem of capacity. They've said that manufacturers, they said this in the context of people who've already got a product on the market under the old Medical Device Directive, so the old rules that finished in 2021. You have got until September 2024 now to sign a contract with a notified body. Before that, by July 2024, you need to be working to a quality management system. And that ability finishes in 2028, that you can still keep your product on the market. So what they've said is effectively the notified bodies get 3.5, 4 years to fix the problem and see you after that. But the saying is some of the old products that are already on the market under the old rules have got until 2028. Now, if you've got a brand new product, which will be the case for you guys, that does not apply. You must sign a contract with a notified body and get in their queue and get dealt with.
And
how long it take is, say, 18 months, 2 years, maybe, in many cases. So what does that really mean to you? It means start planning your strategy. So first thing is you're researching in an institute. If there is a promising technology, one of the things, the question is that now going to be a spin-out company? Because it's a spin-out company that needs to be talking to notified body. You know, what is the name? It's not going to be your foundation's name on the product as the manufacturer. It'll be some company that you make. So you could start applying to notified body, and you'll know, and they'll say to you, in a few months, we can audit your QMS. Well, we tell people it takes 6 months to a year, maybe some median 9 months to get a QMS, just a QMS in a fit state to get the QMS certified.
Okay.
So then you can start saying, well, it's going to take that long anyway. Now, the next question is, how long is it going to take you to really develop the product to the right software development life cycle? How long is it going to take you in the clinical development life cycle to generate the evidence you need to show sort of effectiveness and before that efficacy? So maybe that's going to take you a year, year and a half from a research idea to turn it into a real product. So as long as the notified body can respond to you in that year and a half, that's the critical timeline. Now, the problem is, of course, that not the notified bodies can't necessarily respond to you that quickly still. So then it comes back to strategy. Then do you have a non-medical device product you need to put on the market first? Or do you do pre-certification investigations? Do you then go and try grant funding or something to generate your evidence to keep your idea alive until it can be certified? So hopefully not painting or not trying to make this a bleak picture and give you doom and gloom, but say, look, this is reality.
I appreciate reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I asked these hard questions.
Actual reality, not virtual reality, not augmented reality, actual reality.
And thank you.
We're coming up on the hour, so let's do one more question. I don't know, Thiago, you unmuted yourself briefly, so maybe you have a question.
Yeah, I don't think there's an exact answer to this question, but I was wondering from your experience, in accompanying startups that are mostly, created by researchers or physicians, is it common for them when going from a research lab to a spin-off for the startups to hire talent for the management? Or usually it's enough, based on success cases? Do they bring outside management skill, or usually the founders can just between themselves sort of launch the startup and take the product to market without bringing an external person for CEO role or something like that?
Great question, but then that answers one of the answers is, what do the founders want to do? So you think, what are the roles? CEO's role really should be to make sure money happens for the company. Yeah, Nina's done it before. So CEO's job is to make sure money comes, whether it's from investors, grants, ultimately customers. So the CEO's job is to go out and have charisma, have something to appeal, something to sell to get the money. Now, is the founder comfortable to do that? Or does the founder want to continue doing the research, doing the detail bits? Now, next role, CTO, Chief Technical Officer. Their role ought to be strategy. One big mistake, I think, with many startups is they say the lead developer, they attract someone to be a developer, call them the CTO, but that person does not have any idea of how to create a technical strategy, how to lay out in front what needs to be done. They just know what to do now, or have an idea. So, do the founders have an idea of strategic thinking for the technical side, the software development life cycle, or do they want to be actually putting the code together? Next role, Chief Medical Officer. So again, does the founder have someone who's a clinician who knows something about the subject, who can be then going and talking to the key opinion leaders in the hospitals and the medical associations, putting some weight to your idea, getting into other people's heads that you've got the good idea. So the KOLs, the key opinion leaders, or what do they want to do? So that's why I said you're right to say that's not the question you can answer. It's really a question of what is the skill set of the founders, and can they realistically, have a realistic view of what's their contributions, make the idea real, and what do they need to get someone else to do?
And you would say those are the three key roles for a startup operating in a medical device
and then
space.
There's a technical role. There's like the who's going to be in charge of quality and regulatory. So you need that. You need perhaps a chief commercial officer. And then as the product evolves, you maybe don't need that to begin with, but someone who's actually doing the selling. Someone who knows about how to do selling, knows about how to make contacts and sell and, do that. So then it also varies by what is the stage of development of the company. You don't potentially need salespeople, you don't need field service people to begin with, but you will eventually. CEO role changes as well. To begin with, the CEO is all about keeping with the investors, keeping on top of grants and things, but at some stage when the product becomes real, the CEO's role is more perhaps about focusing on customers and keeping, now instead of having the diverging the ideas and getting the money for that, making sure that everything's staying on track, because now you've got something that's working, you've got a quality management system, a way the company works that you have to keep running in a particular way. also that the roles change as well. It's not an easy answer. This is why oftentimes as a company you'll have something like some non-executive directors, some experienced people who've done things before to advise your board. Does that help?
Yeah, a lot. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Mike. If anyone has questions, can they reach out to you? Would it be okay if I share your email with the group? Cool. I'll send it via an email out to you guys. And yeah, this was super informative. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And if you're ever in Lisbon, please stop by.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.